March 6, 1945. Cologne Cathedral Square, Germany. The gunner's periscope fractured into a spiderweb of cracks as Feldwebel Carl Hoffmann pressed his eye against it, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar silhouette crawling through the rubble-strewn street. For 3 years he had memorized every American tank profile, the high-riding Sherman with its 75mm gun, the nimble Stuart light tanks that Tiger crews derisively called toy Panzers, even the rare Jumbo Shermans with extra armor that still couldn't penetrate a Tiger's frontal plate at typical combat ranges. But this was something else entirely. Das ist kein Sherman, he whispered into the intercom, that's not a Sherman. His voice trembled in a way his crew had never heard. Through the cracked optics he saw the gun barrel, long and thick, much larger than anything mounted on a Sherman. The hull sat lower, more angular, its armor sloped and cast rather than welded. The turret was massive, almost disproportionate, as if someone had bolted an anti-aircraft gun onto a tank chassis. His mind raced through recognition charts and intelligence briefings, nothing matched. In seconds, Hoffmann and his crew would become among the first Germans to encounter America's newest weapon, a tank that could kill them at typical battle ranges from the front. Nearby, a Panther from Panzer Brigade 106, commanded by Lieutenant Wilhelm Bartelborth, had already learned this the hard way. Its crew had been destroyed minutes earlier by a tank no German intelligence file had ever described, the M26 Pershing. The Pershing's 90mm M3 gun fired at nearly 853 meters per second, about 2,800 feet per second, its armor-piercing shell crossing 120 meters in less than a blink. The projectile slammed into the Panther's mantlet, roughly 100 to 110 millimeters thick, and tore through it, detonating inside the turret. That day, the mathematics of war were rewritten, not in battle plans, but in the physics of steel and the limits of belief. For 2.5 years, German heavy tank crews had lived inside machines that seemed to defy the rules of armored warfare. The Tiger I, first deployed near Leningrad in August 1942, carried the fearsome 8.8 cm kilowatt K-36 gun, capable of destroying any Allied tank it faced at ranges of over 1,500 meters. Its frontal armor, 100mm on the hull, with a mantlet up to 120 to 140mm, made it virtually immune to the 75mm guns of early Allied tanks at normal distances. The psychological impact was immense. Veterans of Schwer Panzerabteilung 506 described a feeling of near invincibility. Allied gunners, by contrast, developed what they called Tiger fever, often mistaking any German tank for the dreaded beast. And there were moments that cemented the myth. On June 13, 1944, SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann and his Tiger single-handedly devastated British armor at Villers-Bocage, destroying more than a dozen vehicles in minutes, though exact counts remain debated. He died 2 months later in Normandy, but the legend of the Tiger endured. By late 1944, German doctrine capitalized on this edge. Tigers and King Tigers, Tiger II, positioned themselves at long range, exploiting superior optics and firepower to destroy Allied tanks before they could return accurate fire. A single Tiger, well sighted, could hold up an entire Allied column. But while German crews believed their tanks were unmatched, 8,000 kilometers away in Detroit, American engineers were quietly preparing a weapon that would challenge that faith. In September 1942, alarmed by intelligence on German heavy tanks, the U.S. Ordnance Department authorized a new design project, the T-26 series. The standard M4 Sherman, backbone of American armor, had been designed for reliability and mobility, not dueling Tigers. Its 75mm gun, adequate against early Panzer IVs, was no match for German heavy armor. Even the later 76mm armed variants struggled head-on. The new design aimed to change that. The Pershing program mobilized 14 major contractors, 300 subcontractors, and tens of thousands of workers across 22 states. Fisher Body, a division of General Motors, converted its Grand Blanc tank arsenal in Michigan for Pershing production, introducing new casting techniques for the turret, a revised transmission, and, most importantly, the integration of the powerful 90mm M3 gun. This gun, adapted from the successful 90mm anti-aircraft weapon, fired a 24-pound armor-piercing projectile at roughly 2,800 feet per second. The standard M82 APC round could penetrate about 100 to 120 mm of armor at 500 yards, depending on angle, and the advanced T30E16 HVAP tungsten round could pierce over 220 mm under ideal conditions, enough to threaten even a King Tiger at medium range. Production was cloaked in secrecy. Workers were told they were building an improved Sherman. Components were made at different sites to prevent anyone from seeing the complete vehicle. When the first 20 tanks were shipped in early 1945, they were labeled as heavy maintenance equipment, covered with tarps, and loaded under tight security. The mission that carried them to Europe was codenamed Zebra. January 15, 1945. New York port of embarkation. Under darkness and heavy guard, 20 T-26E3 tanks were loaded aboard ships bound for Europe. Crews had trained in secret at Fort Knox since November 1944, sworn to secrecy under threat of court-martial. During the crossing, they studied German armor silhouettes and practiced a cover story that they were Sherman replacements. The voyage lasted 11 days through U-boat-infested waters. The tanks arrived at Antwerp on January 26, 1945, and were shipped to the 3rd Armored Division's maintenance depot near Düren, Germany. Major General Maurice Rose, commander of the division, personally briefed officers on the new weapon. On February 25, the first 4 Pershings went into action with the 3rd Armored Division, attached 1 per task force. Orders were strict: avoid unnecessary engagements, and focus on German heavy armor. The Germans never saw it coming. Their intelligence networks, once the envy of Europe, had no idea the Pershing existed. To them, America was still a nation of mass-produced, inferior Shermans, trading quality for quantity. They couldn't imagine that, while producing thousands of medium tanks, U.S. industry had managed to build a true heavy tank as well. February 26, 1945. Elsdorf, Germany. The first Pershing to meet a Tiger never even saw it. The T-26E3 Fireball, newly arrived with the 3rd Armored Division, was inching through the ruined streets of Elsdorf when a German Tiger I lurking in ambush fired first. The 88mm round slammed straight into Fireball's mantlet. The impact tore through the turret, killing the gunner and loader instantly. The tank caught fire, but it didn't explode, a testament to its internal design and ammunition storage improvements. Within days, the wreck was recovered. U.S. engineers patched the mantlet, replaced the damaged gun, and returned Fireball to service by early March 1945. The message was clear: the Pershing could die, but it could also come back. The same could not be said for its opponents. By early March, Allied armor had reached the heart of Cologne, one of Germany's most iconic cities. The spires of the Kölner Dom, the great cathedral, still stood, rising defiantly above a wasteland of shattered stone and steel. There, the Germans positioned their last armored defenders from Panzer Brigade 106. Among them was Lieutenant Wilhelm Bartelborth, commanding a Panther A hull down behind the ruins of the Hotel Gerion. At 3:20 p.m., Bartelborth spotted movement, an American tank crossing the square. Through his periscope, he saw what looked like a Sherman, but with an unusually long gun. He ordered his gunner to fire at 300 meters, point blank for the Panther's 75mm high-velocity cannon. The round struck the American's glacis plate and ricocheted upward in a shower of sparks. It hadn't penetrated. Inside the American tank, call sign Eagle 7, 32nd Armored Regiment, Staff Sergeant Robert Early commanded, and Corporal Clarence Smoyer manned the 90mm gun. Smoyer centered his sight on the Panther's mantlet and fired. The 90mm shell tore through the front of the turret, igniting ammunition. Flames burst through the hatches as the Panther's crew tried to escape. The duel was captured on film by Tech Sergeant James Jim Bates of the 165th Photo Signal Company, footage that would become one of the most famous tank battle recordings in history. Some accounts claim a second German tank nearby, possibly another Panther, was also destroyed by Eagle 7 shortly after. The film clearly documents the first kill, others remain uncertain, lost in the smoke and chaos of the city fight. In less than 5 minutes, the myth of invincible German armor had met its match, and the world had proof on celluloid. When reports of Cologne reached higher German commands, disbelief turned to alarm. The Oberkommando West issued urgent orders to every panzer unit: report immediately any encounters with new American tanks, and provide detailed descriptions. Within days, the responses painted a troubling picture. Units spoke of an American tank with a much longer gun than the Shermans, a long-gun Sherman, as they called it, capable of destroying Panthers and even Tigers from the front at 1,000 meters or more. For the first time in the war, German tank crews began to doubt their battlefield supremacy. The Panzerwaffe training schools had no recognition charts for this new machine. Intelligence manuals still claimed American tanks couldn't penetrate heavy German armor frontally. Reality had changed faster than doctrine. By mid-March 1945, roughly 20 Pershings were operational in Europe, with more arriving every week. Compared to the thousands of Shermans, their numbers were tiny, but the psychological impact was enormous. German tankers who had once advanced confidently now hesitated. Where they had once charged at Shermans with contempt, they now asked themselves, are those really Shermans, or Pershings? The uncertainty was deadly. In tank warfare, hesitation meant death. Reports from the front began to describe crews abandoning tanks after minor breakdowns, loose tracks, thrown treads, even fuel shortages, problems they would once have fought through under fire. To the Germans, the Pershing was more than a tank. It was a symbol that their last edge, technological superiority, was gone. The truth went beyond the battlefield. While Germany struggled to produce barely 100 tanks per month, the United States had built over 2,200 M26 Pershings by October 1945. Of these, about 310 reached Europe before VE Day, and roughly 20 saw combat. Of the total, Fisher-Body's Grand Blanc Arsenal produced 1,739 units, and Chrysler's Detroit Tank Arsenal built 473, together accounting for 2,212 tanks in all. For comparison, Germany had managed only 1,347 Tiger I tanks and 492 Tiger IIS over the entire war. Even the mighty Tiger II, with its 150mm frontal armor and long 8.8 cm kilowatt K-43 gun, could not be built fast enough to matter. The Rye was outproduced, outpaced, and now outgunned. German engineers studying captured Pershings were stunned. The cast turret was a single massive piece, something German foundries could not duplicate at that scale. The Ford GAF V8 engine produced 500 horsepower while remaining reliable under conditions that often crippled Maybach engines. The torque converter transmission was advanced, smooth, and efficient. The interior was spacious, the ergonomics carefully planned, the ammunition storage dampened with wet stowage, a system to prevent fires that German tanks lacked. Even small touches, padded surfaces, good lighting, and an external infantry telephone mounted at the rear for coordination, demonstrated a level of practical crew-centered design foreign to the Panzerwaffe philosophy. Every detail contradicted the Nazi propaganda that portrayed American machines as crude and inferior. By April 1945, Germany's armored forces were disintegrating. Tankers who once believed their machines were invincible now doubted everything: their training, their technology, even their cause. Crews abandoned Panthers and Tigers that could have fought on, declaring them mechanical losses for trivial reasons. Fuel shortages were real, but so was the loss of will. Some units refused to counterattack unless assured there were no Pershings in the sector, a guarantee no one could give. The once proud Panzerwaffe that had stormed across Europe now avoided battle whenever possible. What had begun as a contest of steel ended as a collapse of faith. By April 1945, the German front in the west was collapsing. The Rhine had been crossed. Allied air power ruled the skies, and supply lines to the remaining panzer divisions were cut to ribbons. Tank crews who had once fought with fanatic confidence now hesitated to engage at all. The Pershing's appearance had become the ghost in every rumor, a new long-gun Sherman that could kill them head-on. Even when only Shermans approached, many German crews pulled back rather than risk discovery that the new tanks were among them. In these final weeks, fuel was scarce, ammunition scarcer, but morale was the rarest commodity of all. The Tiger II, 68 tons of steel and arrogance, still outmatched the Pershing on paper: thicker armor, a longer 8.8 cm kilowatt K-43, a theoretical range advantage. Yet crews who once believed they were gods of the battlefield now doubted even their own machines. The Pershing had done what Allied artillery, air raids, and encirclements could not: it shattered the last illusion of superiority. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, thousands of captured panzer crews were interrogated by U.S. intelligence. Over and over, the same admission surfaced: we thought the Americans could not build a tank equal to ours. When we learned they had, we knew the war was lost. Many had never even faced a Pershing directly. For them, the fear was enough. The idea of a heavy American tank, fast, reliable, and mass-produced, was more demoralizing than its physical presence. Only about 310 Pershings reached Europe before the surrender, and perhaps 20 saw combat. Statistically, they were a footnote. Psychologically, they were decisive. The real weapon wasn't the 90mm shell. It was the message that shell carried: America can match you in quality, and drown you in quantity. By the end of 1945, the Pershing had already become the template for a new generation. Re-engined and refined, it evolved into the M46 pattern, followed by the M47 and M48, the tanks that would define Western armor for decades. The U.S. Army's factories had built roughly 2,200 Pershings in total by October 1945, 1,739 from Fisher-Body's Grand Blanc Arsenal and 473 from Chrysler's Detroit Tank Arsenal. Each could be assembled in a fraction of the time it took Germany to handcraft a Tiger. By comparison, the entire German war effort had produced only 1,347 Tiger I and 492 Tiger II tanks, numbers that spelled out defeat in cold arithmetic. To the engineers who built it, the Pershing was proof that American industry could innovate under pressure. To Allied crews, it was salvation, finally, a tank that didn't have to flank to win. To German veterans, it became a symbol of disillusionment. For years they had been told that the Reich's genius and racial purity guaranteed technical mastery. Then, in the ruins of Cologne, they saw an American machine, designed by ordinary citizens, built in democratic factories, pierce the myth of German invincibility. One Waffen-SS tanker later told his interrogators, "If the Americans can build tanks like this, then everything we were told was a lie." The Pershing didn't just break armor. It broke ideology. The Pershing's psychological impact far outweighed its battlefield record. It appeared too late and in too few numbers to change strategy, but just in time to change belief. Rumors of the new heavy Sherman spread faster than the tanks themselves. Reports of tanks destroyed at long range multiplied far beyond reality. Crews in retreat told one another that Pershings were everywhere. By late April, U.S. intelligence noted that captured German tank crews were surrendering earlier than infantry, a reversal of every prior pattern. Many claimed they were out of fuel, others simply said, "The new tanks are coming." It was fear, not fire, that finished them. In Detroit, Grand Blanc, and Newark, assembly lines still roared long after the front had fallen silent. Together, U.S. tank plants covered over 50 million square feet of manufacturing space. The Detroit tank arsenal alone produced more armored tonnage than the entire German wartime industry. While the Reich worshipped craftsmanship, America worshipped production. It wasn't perfection that won the war, it was the ability to be good enough in overwhelming quantity, and to adapt when perfection became necessary. The Pershing was that adaptation, quality born from quantity. The Pershing never truly replaced the Sherman before the war ended. It wasn't flawless, its transmission was temperamental, its gun traverse slower than the late-war German systems, and its armor still vulnerable to a well-placed 88. But those flaws didn't matter. The myth had already died. In psychological terms, 20 Pershings accomplished what 10,000 Shermans could not. They convinced the enemy that resistance was pointless. When the last Panthers burned outside Cologne and the last Tigers lay abandoned on German roadsides, the age of the invincible Panzer ended, not through attrition alone, but through belief. At Fort Knox, a Pershing now stands beside a captured King Tiger. Their placards list armor thickness, gun calibers, and horsepower as though these were the true measures of victory. But the story those numbers hide is psychological. The day American tank crews looked through their sights and knew they could win a frontal duel, and the day German tankers realized the same. The Pershing's barrel, long and steady, became more than a weapon. It became a mirror. In it, Germany saw its own defeat, the reflection of a world where democracy could out-engineer dictatorship, where freedom could build faster, think faster, and adapt faster. Technological superiority, they learned, is temporary. Industrial capacity, and the imagination to use it, endures. In that realization, the M26 Pershing achieved its true victory. It ended not only a war of machines, but a war of minds.